The Waffen-SS constituted the German military's elite forces throughout the Second World War, renowned for executing exceptionally audacious missions. The SS armed forces participated from Poland's invasion through Berlin's collapse into Red Army control. Charged with perpetrating innumerable war atrocities, Waffen-SS personnel were labeled as war criminals and condemned to harsh destinies following the war's conclusion. Today, followers, we shall examine the fate that befell these soldiers after the Third Reich's downfall. Battle of the Bulge. Following the Normandy defeat and the Soviet 1944 offensive, SS forces sought to postpone the unavoidable through fighting until the final moment. SS troops battled with fanaticism, convinced of their status as genuine elite warriors, perishing in massive numbers while neither granting nor seeking quarter. A Waffen-SS frontline soldier's average survival period was merely 2 months. After their Arnhem victory over the Allies, their final major engagement occurred during the Reich's last assault, the Battle of the Bulge. In this confrontation, specialized units commanded by Otto Skorzeny operated behind American lines, generating enormous confusion, while Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced deeper than any force on the American front. By 1945, most German formations fought not merely to delay Soviet advances slightly longer, but for basic survival. In mid-March 1945, the Germans consolidated elements from multiple SS units into a combat formation to protect the Hungarian village of Schoreg against Soviet assault. Hans Gendorf, an officer within the Sturmbataillon of the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf, observed the hopeless struggle of his SS soldiers. Depleted of ammunition for their various armaments, SS troops resorted to employing blades and entrenching tools for defense. Soviet forces presented the Germans with surrender opportunities. When Germans declined the proposal, Russians launched their attack with overwhelming force. Waves of communist troops advanced, supported by massive Soviet armor. A reconstituted battalion from the Nordland Division, which had later merged with the Wiking Division, accompanied the assault gun battalion. As Soviets encircled German units nearby Schöneberg, the Wiking Division's morale began deteriorating. Oberfuhrer Karl Ulrich resolved to preserve his division from annihilation. He commanded his forces to break the encirclement on March 22nd, contrary to Hitler's doctrine that German troops must never yield territory. Another German SS formation, the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen, battled to maintain an escape route for Wiking personnel. Hitler exploded in fury upon discovering the retreat of Wehrmacht and SS units. 5 days afterward, he issued commands that Hohenstaufen division members should strip away the distinctive armbands signifying their elite unit status. The death knell of Nazi Germany. Final Battle of Berlin. Germany's death bell tolled in Berlin. Trapped between advancing Allied armies from east and west, numerous Waffen-SS formations received orders to Berlin for participation in what would become the ultimate battle. By this stage, virtually every German unit represented shadows of their former strength, devastated in personnel and lacking weapons, equipment, and fuel. Divisions had shrunk to battalion size. Despite everything, the SS maintained their fighting spirit. The connections among their soldiers, forged through years of combat together, preserved their determination. This applied equally to ethnic Germans and foreign SS personnel. They remained resolved to fight until the end, primarily because no alternatives existed. Returning home remained impossible, while Soviet capture meant nearly certain death. Even during the final desperate days, the concept of surrendering our arms remained inconceivable, declared an SS soldier. Some Waffen-SS personnel still maintained faith in victory possibilities, even when the war approached its conclusion within weeks, trusting in promises of revolutionary weapons. We understood that significant developments were occurring, that remarkable weapons would soon enter action, and consequently, the war would transform completely, expressed Erik Wallin, a Swedish member of the Nordland Division. We realized that even superior developments were approaching. Red Army forces advancing toward Berlin discovered a distinctive method to commemorate Hitler's birthday on April 20th, 1945. They celebrated the event by bombarding Berlin's center with their long-range artillery. 2 days later, Hitler erupted in one of his final rages when the 11th SS Panzer Army, established during the war's concluding weeks by Himmler, failed to execute an attack order. It is believed Hitler's outburst resulted from the Waffen-SS, which he considered had never disappointed him previously, finally wavering. Nevertheless, several Waffen SS units remained within the city, including remnants of the Nordland and Charlemagne divisions. They were determined to battle until the conclusion. By this period, the SS began fragmenting. In 1945, individual SS officers hoped to exploit tensions between Western allies and the Soviet Union to initiate negotiations for separate peace with Western allies that would permit the National Socialist states' survival and continuation of the fight against the Soviet Union. Among these officers were Obergruppenführer Karl Wolff, the highest-ranking SS leader for German-occupied Italy, General Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Heydrich's successor heading the Reich Main Security Office, Walter Schellenberg, chief of Department 6 of the Sicherheitsdienst, and even Himmler himself, who appeared increasingly anxious. When SS personnel contemplated surrender possibilities, they encountered a challenging situation. They lacked sufficient authority and clear understanding of post-Nazi regime existence to accept complete surrender, even facing Western allies' firm demands. Surrender and destiny Karl Wolff succeeded in convincing German military leadership in northern Italy to surrender to Anglo-Americans on May 2, 1945, 5 days before the war's end. At April's conclusion, Himmler himself made an unconditional surrender offer through an intermediary to General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander in Europe. Hitler learned of the proposal via radio on April 29, 1945. In one of his final official actions, the German leader ordered Himmler stripped of all ranks and positions. On May 6, 1945, Hitler's successor, Reich President and Admiral Karl Dönitz, formally dismissed Himmler from his duties following Hitler's directives. Despite his promise to all SS personnel to accept complete responsibility for their actions, the former SS chief planned to vanish wearing secret field police uniform and carrying documentation under the name Heinrich Hitzinger. On May 20th, Soviet forces captured Hitzinger and transferred him to the British, to whom Himmler revealed his true identity. While his captors attempted a body search, Himmler eluded them by crushing a cyanide capsule with his teeth. Following the Third Reich's collapse and Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler's death, SS soldiers confronted their brutal destiny. Immersed in uncertainty regarding a future marked by defeat, these elite warriors found themselves pursued by the Allies. Waffen SS soldiers returned home on foot. At that period, railways were almost completely destroyed, roads possessed minimal asphalt, and rivers required swimming crossings because bridges had been bombed. With few farmers' carts available, many German soldiers returned from Belgium, France, Italy, and the Netherlands, hoping their families remained alive in rural areas since cities were devastated by Allied bombing. Many were shot without warning. Surrender. The SS maintained a reputation for refusing prisoners and discouraging capitulation. During the war's final phases, numerous SS divisions attempted surrendering to Western allies, who were more inclined to accept them as prisoners and generally avoided execution after processing. However, it was understood that the Allies, both American and British, sometimes killed German soldiers attempting surrender, regardless of SS membership or not. They avoided surrendering to Poles, French, and, curiously, Canadians. It was observed that Canadians only accepted SS prisoners when specifically commanded to do so, and it appears those orders required repetition. Normandy had made Canadians extremely unforgiving toward the SS. In contrast, Soviets often summarily executed those attempting surrender, and if they managed successful surrender, their survival chances were generally minimal, just like any soldier or civilian captured by Russians. When captured by Western allies, some divisions were returned to their origin countries or handed to Russians, especially if they had served extensively on the Eastern Front. Depending on their homeland, some faced execution while others were welcomed as heroes for fighting communism or simply ignored. Those delivered to Russians often faced execution or forced labor, and cases existed where Soviets killed entire surrendered Waffen SS divisions. In some instances, the survivor count from these divisions after surrender reached single digits. Most personnel possessed the SS blood tattoo, and the Allies knew about it. It was essentially just a blood-type tattoo. Americans made all German POWs march in straight lines, shirtless with raised arms. If a blood group tattoo was visible, they were separated. Some SS members went so far as cutting their skin and using cosmetics to conceal the tattoo. Americans received pamphlets describing how German POWs would attempt hiding these tattoos. When captured, they were identified and interrogated. If it was a lower rank who enlisted in 1943, they would be sent to a POW camp and later released. The SS began recruiting soldiers in 1943, so some personnel truly had no choice and would receive pension compensation. If it was a high-ranking SS officer, they were interrogated and sent either to a POW camp or executed upon capture. They would be stripped of their ranks as they were no longer soldiers but POWs. Lower-ranking SS soldiers maintained high survival hopes, especially if their documentation was destroyed, since the Schutzstaffel offices destroyed much evidence that could be used against them from 1944 onwards, including documents indicating SS membership and enrollment years. Despite their crimes, the SS would receive fair treatment by Western allies. That is what they sought when all hope was lost. However, Soviets did not employ a fair judicial system like Western allies did. In fact, much SS and Wehrmacht personnel were sent into Soviet custody and were never heard from again to this day. Some SS personnel remain missing. They simply vanished. Soviets would imprison them in gulags where they could either be released or remain forever. Trials and post-war. With Himmler and Heydrich deceased, the victorious Allies chose Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Heydrich's replacement as Reich Main Security Office head, to represent the SS and all its atrocities at the major war criminals trial in Nuremberg, which commenced in November 1945. The tribunal prosecutors also collectively accused and condemned the SS and Gestapo as criminal organizations. The leadership of three principal SS organizations, the Concentration Camp Administration, the Einsatzgruppen, and Himmler's Reich Commission for the Strengthening of Germandom, were prosecuted in three subsequent Nuremberg trials under the International Military Tribunal's auspices. Each victorious Allied power and each reconstituted government, following liberation from German occupation, prosecuted hundreds of mid- and lower-level SS officers. Although SS members continued facing trials in the Federal Republic of Germany and elsewhere after World War II's conclusion, even to the present day, the vast majority of SS and police personnel never answered for their crimes. Following Kaltenbrunner's execution on October 16, 1946, the destiny of high-ranking SS officials varied enormously. Some were prosecuted and executed like Oberfuhrer Fritz Knüchlein. Others were captured but died naturally before trial, like Oberfuhrer Oskar Dirlewanger. Many were charged with war crimes and served prison time like Brigade Führer Kurt Meyer. Beyond the four-nation process of the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, the occupation forces, including the United States, also conducted individual military tribunals within their respective zones. The trials overseen by the U.S. Army occurred in Dachau from November 1945 to December 1947. The defendants encompassed a broad spectrum of individuals from senior German military members, Nazi officials, concentration camp personnel, and also civilians. They were accused of war crimes against Allied POWs and crimes committed against civilians and Allied POWs in concentration camps, including Dachau. As a component of the Dachau trials, the Malmedy massacre trial lasted 2 months from May to July 1946, concentrating on Waffen-SS crimes against American POWs and Belgian civilians. The Malmedy massacre was a documented and publicized killing of unarmed American POWs by the 1st SS during the Battle of the Bulge on December 17, 1944. Elements of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, commanded by Joachim Peiper, captured 113 American soldiers, assembled them in a field, and machine-gunned them. Some survived by burying themselves beneath their comrades or feigning death, but 84 American POWs were murdered. In the 1946 trial, 74 SS members, including Joachim Peiper and Sepp Dietrich, were charged with crimes. These men were detained in various locations after defeat. After being identified as associated with units responsible for war crimes, they were interrogated in Schwäbisch Hall, Germany, by American soldiers who spoke multiple languages and had escaped Nazi persecution. Initially, the prisoners were housed together and had opportunities to coordinate stories and plan their defense. The 7 Malmedy survivors testified at the trial, which began on May 16th. Belgian civilian witnesses who observed the murder of unarmed civilians also testified. SS members testified under oath. Much of the statements were supported by nearly 100 testimonies presented to the court, including confessions and statements from some defendants implicating their co-defendants. The accused in uniform wore numbered identification cards around their necks. Only a few had the chance to testify. The prosecution contended that the murder of American POWs and others perpetrated by Piper and his men was premeditated, resulting from Hitler's orders for a ruthless campaign to instill fear and terror. The defense argued that the killings occurred during battle. After the trials concluded, the verdict came on July 16, 1946, condemning all defendants. In Dachau, an American military tribunal sentenced 46 Waffen-SS members, including Joachim Piper, to death by hanging for crimes against Allied POWs. Another 23 received life sentences, and the remainder received 10 to 20 years. What occurred in the subsequent months and years has become a subject of interest and investigation. The proceedings and pretrial interrogations became highly publicized, controversial, and politicized. The convicted SS men claimed that American interrogators employed illegal methods, including torture, and that all statements were coerced. Former Chief Defense Counsel Colonel Willis Everett continued working on behalf of the convicted men, even after returning home in 1947. After the 1946 trial, controversies emerged, and a commission was established to investigate in 1948. Some death sentences were commuted to life imprisonment, but not for Joachim Piper and others. In 1951, many were released, and the few remaining death sentences, including Piper's, were commuted. In 1956, Piper and others were released from Landsberg prison. Years following the conflict, former Waffen-SS officers organized HIAG, a mutual aid association of former Waffen-SS members. It was a lobbying group and veterans organization established in West Germany in 1951, with the primary objective of achieving the legal rehabilitation of the Waffen-SS. In 1951, Otto Kumm, a former SS brigade Führer, founded HIAG, which had over 20,000 members. The high-ranking Waffen-SS General Paul Hauser was HIAG's spokesman. Well-known former Waffen-SS commanders such as Felix Steiner and Herbert Gille became prominent figures. Sepp Dietrich and Kurt Meyer joined after being released from prison in 1955 and 1954 respectively. Meyer became HIAG's most effective spokesman. After his death in 1961, Erich Kern assumed that role. Since 1949, the prohibition on forming veterans associations had been lifted. In October 1950, a group of former officers produced the Himmerod Memorandum, which they presented to German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer. They demanded the liberation of the German Waffen-SS and the cessation of the defamation of German soldiers, including those of the Waffen-SS. Kurt Meyer, a former Waffen-SS commander, published his memoirs Grenadiers as part of the campaign for SS rehabilitation and glorification of their wartime role. Although HIAG achieved the rehabilitation of the Waffen-SS, their propaganda efforts contributed to reshaping the Waffen-SS image in popular culture. Their influence persists, with academic studies being overshadowed by numerous amateur historical studies, SS officers' memoirs, internet forums, picture books, websites, and war games. HIAG also had a publishing house, Munen Verlag, which served as a platform for their publicity objectives. Professional historians have described their work as revisionist apologetics. At their first major meeting in 1952 in Verden, Hermann Bernhard Ramke, a former paratrooper general and convicted war criminal, condemned the Western Allies as the real war criminals and insisted that the blacklist on which all former SS members were placed would soon become a list of honor. Joachim Piper. One of the most prominent officers of the 1st Waffen-SS Division was Joachim Piper, whose end was both curious and unclear. After his release, Piper led a discreet life and did not publicly associate with former Nazi Party members. However, privately he remained a firm believer and a member of the secret Waffen-SS community in the Federal Republic of Germany. The Mutual Aid Association of former Waffen-SS members provided him with support in finding employment, initially at Porsche in Stuttgart, but he was dismissed due to his wartime actions. The community helped him again to secure a position as a car salesman at Volkswagen. In June 1964, Piper was brought to trial in Stuttgart for the Boves massacre in September 1943. Despite the battle group's collective guilt, the court determined there was no evidence of Joachim Piper's individual responsibility, or that he had directly ordered the massacre. He was acquitted of all charges. After the trial, in a 1967 interview, he expressed his National Socialist sentiments and his discontent with contemporary Germany. mentioning his desire to relocate to France despite not having particular affinity for the French, due to his love for the country and his disdain for German materialism. In 1972, Joachim Peiper and his wife Sigurd decided to move to Traves in Burgundy, France. They chose a small house on the village outskirts. Although French authorities knew Peiper's identity, they granted him a temporary residence permit for 5 years. While living in France, he worked as a translator of military history books. He appeared to lead a quiet life and rarely went out. In 1974, a former French resistance member, Paul Cacheux, thought he recognized Peiper in a shop. Although uncertain, he reported his possible presence to the French Communist Party. In 1976, Cacheux contacted Pierre Durand, a historian who confirmed Peiper's identity in the Stasi archives. On June 21, 1976, anti-Nazi activists distributed flyers in Traves informing that Peiper was a war criminal. On June 22, an article in L'Humanité confirmed his presence, thus beginning a campaign calling for his expulsion. On July 13, Peiper advised his wife to return to Germany, hoping the situation would improve. However, in the early morning of July 14th, police received calls about a fire at Peiper's house. When firefighters arrived, they found the house in flames and a severely burned body inside, reduced to about 60 centimeters due to the intense heat of the fire. Reintegration into civilian life in post-war Germany. Waffen-SS veterans played a significant role in efforts to rehabilitate the reputation of the Waffen-SS, who had committed numerous war crimes during World War II. High-ranking German politicians courted former Waffen-SS members and their veterans organization, HIAG. Controversially, some veterans served in the new German armed forces, the Bundeswehr. Additionally, Waffen-SS leaders during the war, such as Paul Hauser and Kurt Meyer, published several revisionist or uncritical books about the Waffen-SS in the post-war years. HIAG wielded some political influence in West Germany and attempted to attract mainstream parties. But this changed in the 1960s when the Veterans Organization, having achieved its goals, shifted towards far-right politics. HIAG greatly exaggerated its influence and at no point represented more than 8% of all Waffen-SS veterans in West Germany. In Germany, the historical review of the impact of Waffen-SS veterans on post-war German society is ongoing, and several books have been published on the subject in recent years. The issue of Waffen-SS veterans in West German society reached a critical point when the country began rearming and formed the Bundeswehr in 1955. Initially, the intention was not to admit any former Waffen-SS members, but this soon changed to allow former members up to the rank of Obersturmbannführer, lieutenant colonel. Public opinion was divided on the matter, as many people in Germany had also suffered under the Nazi regime, while many others had been voluntary or involuntary members of Nazi organizations like the SS. The exclusion of former Waffen-SS members was criticized by HIAG, which tried to establish a distinction between the honorable Waffen-SS and the evil Allgemeine SS, despite up to 60,000 Waffen-SS men also serving in concentration and extermination camps. The admission of former Waffen-SS members into the new Bundeswehr created some discomfort with the former Allied powers, Britain, France, and the United States. West Germany received conditional approval from the U.S. State Department for the admission of former Waffen-SS members into the armed forces, provided the number of applications was small and the selection process careful. This position was clarified after a question from the American Jewish Committee on how this step would impact the democratic nature of the new German armed forces. From the German side, rejecting former Waffen-SS members was seen as politically dangerous, as the estimated 500,000 Waffen-SS veterans, a number later considered too high, were too large a group to ignore as potential voters. German and Waffen-SS veterans were courted not only by West Germany's conservative government. Opposition leader Kurt Schumacher also maintained good relations with the organization. The number of applications from former Waffen-SS members for the new Bundeswehr remained low, with 3,117 applications received by September 1956, of which 508 were accepted, including 33 officers. Despite the promised selection process, at least one member of the Allgemeine SS, Major Ulrich Barsch, who had been a guard at the Buchenwald concentration camp, was approved. Overall, the number of former Waffen-SS members in the Bundeswehr never exceeded 770. In comparison, the same selection process was not applied to the Federal Criminal Police Office, where 33 of the 57 senior officials were former SS members. In post-war Germany, several former Waffen SS members found success, adopting diverse approaches to reveal their past. Günter Grass, awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1999, admitted in 2006 that he joined the SS in 1944. Actor Hardy Kruger was drafted into the Waffen SS in 1945 and admitted his past by refusing to shoot at American troops. Another prominent German actor, Horst Tappert, kept his past secret, and only 5 years after his death did it become public that he had served in the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf since 1942. East German painter Bernhard Heissig, who volunteered for the SS in 1942, admitted his early past and joined the Communist Party after the war. Journalist and Waffen-SS volunteer Franz Schönhuber worked for 35 years for Bavarian newspapers and Bayerischer Rundfunk, Bavaria's state television, before being fired for downplaying Nazi crimes in his autobiography, after which he turned to far-right politics with moderate success.